All right, so in this video, I'm going to talk about five essential things that you need to have inside of your contract. All right, when you want to purchase a property, whether you're wholesaling it or flipping it, you have to have a contract to give to the seller, the realtor, um, or the attorney, whoever is representing the seller. All right, you're going to have to do the transaction with the contract. You have to submit a contract. And in that contract, there are five things that you must have for that contract to be valid. So let's dive right in. All right, so number one is going to be price. Now, I know this is something that should go without saying, but I have to say it. Make sure you have the price that you and the seller agreed upon in that contract. All right, just take your time. It happens. Okay, you may get excited that you finally got a seller to say yes to your offer, and you may look over it, but just make sure that you have the price on that contract. Okay, that's the first thing the seller is going to look for. All right, they are going to look at that price to make sure the price is there. Obviously, because they are anxious to sell the house, and they're ready to get rid of it. So the first thing that they are going to look at is that price. Make sure the price is on the contract. The next thing that needs to be in that contract is the payment method. All right, how are you going to pay for that piece of real estate? Make sure it is clear and concise in that contract. Now, for example, you may be paying cash, right? You may have told the seller that this is a cash deal. So it needs to say that you are paying cash in that contract. Or you might be getting a hard money loan. Or you could be, financing the property through a regular conventional VA, FHA, or you might be doing creative financing, right? You might be doing some type of seller financing to purchase that property. And if that's the case, then you need to make sure that, those terms for seller financing, those terms are outlined in that contract. Make sure you have the amount of money the amount of money you're putting down in that contract. Also, you want to make sure the balloon payment, how many years it's going to take you to pay that full price. You want to make sure that's in there. The interest rate, right? The amortization. You want to make sure all those terms are clearly outlined in that contract, especially if you're doing creative financing, so there's no miscommunication, there's no confusion, and everyone's happy. You want to be transparent. Okay, the third thing that you need in your contract is the amount of earnest money that you are putting in escrow, right? The deposit. The earnest money is something that you put into escrow. It lets the seller, the realtor, or the attorney know that you're serious about purchasing the property. Obviously, from a seller standpoint, the more earnest money that the buyer puts in escrow, the better for them. But as the buyer, you want to make sure that you really don't have a whole lot of money in escrow, right? God forbid something happens to the contract and you have to back out, or some litigation needs to happen. You want to have as least amount of money in escrow as possible. However, when you submit the contract, the realtor or attorney and the seller, in most cases, that they're going to look at how much money you're putting down in escrow. So you have to have that amount there inside of the contract. So if something happens, then it's clearly outlined. If there's a breach of contract, the seller is able to receive that earnest money deposit. And, after your, inspection days, if you decide to back out, then you are able to receive that earnest money back within that inspection period timeline. In the contract, you are going to have the amount of earnest money that you are going to put into escrow for that contract to be valid to the seller, realtor, or attorney. I will say this is more so for realtors and attorneys. They're more savvy. They know that the majority of contracts have earnest money deposits. If you're working with the seller, especially if you're direct to seller and they don't have, the representation of an attorney or a realtor, you're more than likely able to get away with not having to put any earnest money into escrow or a very, very low amount. So, this, if you're working directly to seller, you have a more of an advantage than going with a realtor or an attorney. All right, number 4, you need to have whatever contingencies that you and the seller have negotiated needs to be within that contract. And some examples of contingencies can be an inspection period. Earlier, I mentioned inspection days. Your inspection period is a contingency. You are given a certain amount of days within that contract to go check out the property to see if anything is wrong with the roof, electrical, plumbing, foundation. You have a due diligence period, also known as your inspection period, to know what you're buying. And that's a very important contingency, especially as a buyer, as a house flipper, wholesaler, buy and hold investor. You want to make sure you have those inspection days that allows you to know what you're buying. And if you don't agree with what you're buying, if there's something that the seller didn't disclose, or you found something out about the property that the seller didn't tell you, or maybe the seller didn't know, but a thorough inspection was able to find something wrong with the property, you have every right to, not buy that property or ask for a reduction. But that contingency allows you to do that. And you want to make sure you have contingencies in there that will help you, within the sales process. Some other contingencies that you can have in your contract can be, the contract being subject to no liens or violations, right? You won't buy the property if there are liens or violations, something that the seller has to take care of. You can put it in the contract that the seller has to take care of it, or the seller, can say that you have to take care of it. However, it's a contingency in the contract that needs to be outlined and clear in the contract. Mainly, those contingencies are in the additional terms. But those are just, examples of contingencies. Another example could be the property has to be vacant before closing. As a buyer, you want to get sole occupancy of that property. You don't want anybody living in the property. Any debris within the property needs to be, removed. Debris that is in the yard needs to be removed. Those are examples of contingencies within the contract that will really, decide how you guys are going to go about the sales process and how you and the seller are going to close. So just make sure you have any contingencies agreed upon or negotiated between you and the seller, you and the attorney, or you and the realtor. And I will tell you that, having this stuff outlined clearly and just being transparent will really help you build a reputation as, one of those buyers within the market that makes closing easy. You kind of really want that reputation, because then the seller, you may not, buy from that seller again, but the seller knows other people who wants to sell. So that seller is going to refer you to friends and family who needs to sell. That creates more business for you, and not only for the seller, but for the realtor and the attorney. When they realize that you were able to do a smooth closing, it helps everyone. And then you build that reputation, and then they're willing to come back to you for more deals, or to sell you more deals. That's why it's very important to have these essential things in your contract to make closing a lot easier and to build that reputation. And number 5 is a closing date. You need to have a closing date within the contract. That's the second thing that the seller is going to ask about, is the closing date. That's the second thing they're going to look for. All right, how long is it going to take us to close? Because they want to sell the property, they want to get paid, and you have to have that closing date. A gem that I'm going to share with you: make the closing date a certain amount of days. Don't put in an exact date, okay? For example, you can put that the closing date is going to be on or before 30 days or on or before 14 days. You would rather do that than put an actual closing date, because the closing date really starts, that time starts when the final signature is made. So you could give a seller a contract on Tuesday, and then the seller doesn't, you know, sign the contract until Friday. But however, you put a closing date, you know, already, and so that timeline starts from when the seller has made that last signature. So really, your closing date is a lot shorter now versus what it would be if you would have just put 30 days or 14 days. That it is really beneficial for you to do it that way, you know, because you never know when the last signature is going to be made. So just put on or before 30 days, 21 days, 45 days. Also, you don't want to put an exact date because, so say that happens and now you have to go back and forth with the seller to make corrections on the closing date. And that just wastes more time. And that gives the seller an opportunity to just change their mind and not want to go, you know, with your contract. If you have to go back and forth and you have to make signatures and initials and everything because you have an exact closing date, but they signed the contract a week from when you put the closing date, like just put 30 days. Put on or before 30 days, put on or before 45 days, put on or before, you know, 14 days, 21, whatever, however you want to, however soon or late you want to close. Just make sure you don't put an exact date. That'll definitely help you out. However, make sure there is a closing date in the contract because you need a closing date. And that is the second thing the seller is going to look for, besides the first thing, which is the price. And number 6, the last thing that you need to have in the contract is who you are going to use as your closing agent. You need the closing agent, also known as the title company or closing attorney. You need to have their information in that contract so there's no miscommunication about who's doing the closing. And you ideally want the closing to be with your title company or your closing agent because you more than likely are going to be the one paying the closing cost as a buyer, especially a cash buyer. You're going to be paying the closing costs. You don't want to use the seller's closing agent or the realtor's closing attorney because you're not used to working with them and you don't really know what their fees are going to be. So if you're paying the closing costs as a buyer, you want to, you know, obviously work with their title company who's going to be more flexible on closing fees because you've worked with them multiple times before. So it just benefits you as the buyer to close with your closing agent. You also want to make sure that the closing attorney, title company, closing agent, whoever you're using, their information is in that contract. So you want to have their address, their email, and their phone number in that contract. So that way the seller knows who to reach out to. The seller's not asking you, you know, who do I talk to get my funds? Or the attorney is not, you know, reaching out to you trying to figure out who to get in contact with to prepare seller docs for. Having that information in there makes it convenient for everyone. And again, making a smooth and efficient and convenient sales process builds your reputation, right? It allows you to get more clientele. People are going to come to you to buy their property. So make sure you have the closing agents, title company, or closing attorneys information within the contract. It's going to save so much time for everyone to be able to reach out to the title company for closing. It's going to make it a smoother and faster process. So just make sure you have those 6 essential things in your contract. You have those in your contract. It's going to make it a valid contract. It's going to make it an easier contract to understand. Everyone's going to be on the same page, and it's going to be a smoother and more convenient, more essential closing for everyone. I hope you got value out of this video. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next video.